The rain lashed against the windows of the silver BMW as Arthur Davies drove aimlessly through the cobbled streets of London. His knuckles, white with tension, gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him connected to reality. The doctor's words still echoed in his mind like a nightmare. "Severe oligospermia, Mr. Davies. I'm afraid the chances of conceiving naturally are practically nil." At 42, Arthur had built a financial empire from nothing. Invest London, his fintech company, was worth over $300 million. He had everything money could buy: a mansion in Belgravia, luxury cars, exotic vacations. Everything except the one thing he truly desired: a family. The memory of Lady Eleanor pierced his chest like a sharp dagger. 3 weeks had passed since his fiancée, heiress to one of London's most aristocratic families, had left the engagement ring on the marble table in his study. "You can't give me heirs, Arthur," she had said, with that coldness he mistook for elegance. "My family expects me to continue the lineage. It's not personal, it's practical." "Not personal." Arthur let out a bitter laugh that was lost in the roar of the engine. How could it not be personal when it concerned his inability to create life? The fog thickened over Westminster Bridge, blurring the city lights into golden smudges. Arthur didn't see the truck until it was too late. The headlights rushed towards him like beasts' eyes in the darkness. His heart stopped for an eternal second. He swerved sharply to the right. The BMW leaped the safety barrier with a metallic crash that cut through the night like a scream. The world became a whirlwind of shattered glass, twisted metal, and the strange sensation of flying. The car flipped 3 times in the air before crashing into the bank of the River Thames with an impact that shook the earth. Ms. Clara Miller walked along the embankment, her heart heavy and her ballet slippers dangling from her right hand. The audition at the Royal Opera House had been a disaster. The director had looked at her with pity when he saw her 5-month belly, as if it were a broken relic of what she once was. "I'm sorry, Clara," he had murmured, "but you know how it is. We need total flexibility." Total flexibility, as if she carried a disability instead of a life growing inside her. The crash's roar jolted her from her melancholic thoughts. Without hesitation, she ran towards the sound, her dancer's muscles responding with the precision that years of training had etched into her DNA. The BM lay overturned by the river, steam rising from the hood, and the strange silence that follows a catastrophe. Clara could see a man trapped inside, conscious but disoriented. "Sir! Sir! Can you hear me?" she shouted, approaching the vehicle. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. Arthur slowly opened his eyes. Through the shattered windshield, he saw the face of a young woman with intense green eyes and brown hair escaping from a ponytail. There was something in her expression, determination mixed with genuine concern, that immediately calmed him. "It's okay," Clara said in a firm but gentle voice. "I'm going to get you out of here." With a strength that defied her delicate appearance, Clara managed to pry open the wrecked door. Years of dance had given her a unique understanding of the human body and its limits. She carefully helped Arthur out of the vehicle. "Can you walk?" she asked, putting his arm over her shoulders. "I think so," Arthur murmured, surprised by the warmth radiating from this stranger. He leaned on her, feeling for the first time in weeks that he wasn't completely alone. They moved away from the car just as a spark ignited the gasoline fumes. The explosion lit up the night like a macabre firework, and Arthur realized that this unknown woman had just saved his life. "Thank you," he whispered, looking into her eyes under the golden light of the flames. "I don't know who you are, but Clara," she said simply. "And you don't have to thank me for anything. I just hope you have someone who cares about you at home." Arthur felt a pang in his chest. There was no one at all. But as he looked at this mysterious woman, who had appeared like an angel in his darkest night. Something inside him began to awaken. Something he hadn't known had been asleep until that moment. 3 days after the accident, Arthur found himself standing in front of the entrance of St. Thomas's Hospital with a bouquet of white roses in his hands and an emptiness in his stomach that had nothing to do with skipping breakfast. He had hired a private investigator to find Clara, but he wanted to thank her personally. His bruised ribs protested when he pushed the hospital's revolving door. The doctor had insisted he rest, but Arthur couldn't get the image of those compassionate green eyes out of his head. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist, an older woman with reading glasses dangling from a gold chain. "I'm looking for someone who might work here or come regularly. Her name is Clara. Clara Miller." The voice came from behind him, soft but unmistakable. Arthur turned slowly, and there she was. She wore a navy blue dress that accentuated her eyes, and now that he could see her clearly under the hospital's fluorescent light, he noticed the gentle curves of her pregnancy. "You," he murmured, feeling his pulse quicken. "I was looking for you." Clara studied him with curiosity. Away from the chaos of the accident, she could see he was a handsome man with dark hair, slightly graying at the temples, and dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "How did you find me?" she asked, heading towards the hospital cafeteria. Arthur followed her, noticing how she walked with the natural grace of a dancer. "I have my resources," Arthur confessed, feeling strangely nervous. "But when I found out you came here regularly for prenatal checkups, I wanted to wait for you. I needed to see you again." They sat at a table by the window overlooking the hospital gardens. Arthur watched as Clara unconsciously stroked her belly as she spoke, a gesture so natural and protective that it produced a strange mixture of tenderness and pain in him. "How are you feeling?" Clara asked, ignoring her own circumstances to worry about him. "The blow was quite strong. Better than I deserve," Arthur said honestly. "Clara, I can't stop thinking about what you did that night. You risked your life and your baby's for a complete stranger." Clara smiled, and Arthur felt something inside his chest expand. "It wasn't a rational decision," she admitted. "I just couldn't stand by and watch someone in danger, especially someone who seemed as lost as I feel most days." The honesty in her voice completely disarmed him. Arthur, accustomed to conversations full of strategies and ulterior motives in the business world, found himself with someone who spoke from the heart, unfiltered. "Lost?" he asked softly. Clara looked out the window where a young couple pushed a baby stroller along the garden path. "My baby's father. Well, let's just say he's not in the picture," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Turns out there are men who see pregnancy as an inconvenience to their life plans." Arthur felt a sudden, inexplicable anger towards the man who had abandoned this extraordinary woman. "He's an idiot," he said with more vehemence than he intended. Clara laughed, a genuine laugh that filled the space between them. "That's exactly the word my adoptive mother, Mrs. Evelyn, used, though she added some more colorful adjectives in East London slang." "East London?" Arthur frowned. That neighborhood was worlds away from his life in Belgravia. "Yes, that's where I grew up. Evelyn found me in an orphanage when I was 5, and she gave me everything she had. We didn't have much money, but there was more than enough love." Clara looked at him directly. "And do you have family?" Arthur felt the familiar weight of loneliness. "My parents died when I was a teenager. I've built a company. I have financial success, but..." He stopped, surprised by his own vulnerability. "Turns out money can't buy the things that truly matter." "Like family?" Clara murmured, understanding immediately. "Like family," Arthur confirmed. They sat in silence for a moment, two wounded souls recognizing each other without need for words. "Clara," Arthur finally said, "would you like to have dinner with me? Not as a date," he quickly clarified, seeing her cautious expression. Just as two people who understand what it's like to feel lost. Clara studied him carefully. There was something about this man that both comforted and scared her. After Mr. Richard Thorne, she had sworn not to trust so easily again. But Arthur was different. There was a sincerity in his eyes that Richard had never had. "I know a place," she said slowly, "but it would have to be near my dance school. I have classes tonight." "You're a dancer?" Arthur leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Was," Clara corrected. "Now I teach children in Brixton. It's different from what I used to do, but I like it more." Arthur nodded, but as he watched her talk about her work with a passion that lit up her entire face, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets her past held, and why he had the feeling that their stories were more intertwined than either of them could imagine. The Dreams in Motion dance school was located in a 3-story building in the heart of Brixton, with exposed brick walls and large windows that filled the studios with natural light. Arthur followed Clara up the wooden stairs, feeling each step take him further from his familiar world of steel and glass. "It's not the most elegant place," Clara apologized as she opened the front door, "but it's ours." Arthur entered and was speechless. The walls were covered with children's drawings, performance photos, and mirrors reflecting ballet bars worn smooth by years of use. But what struck him most was the energy emanating from the place. Pure joy crystallized in movement. "Miss Clara!" A girl of about 8 ran towards them, followed by 5 other children of various ages. "Are you coming to the performance tomorrow?" "Of course, Lucy," Clara said, bending down with difficulty to be at the girl's height. "And this is my friend Arthur. Arthur, meet my advanced class." The children looked at him with curiosity mixed with shyness. Arthur, who normally felt comfortable in boardrooms full of intimidating executives, found himself nervous under these innocent gazes. "Do you dance too?" asked a red-haired boy named Michael. "I'm afraid not," Arthur smiled. "I'm better with numbers than with dance steps." "Numbers are boring," Lucy declared with the brutal honesty of childhood. "But if you're Miss Clara's friend, you must be a good person." As Clara prepared the children for class, Arthur sat on a folding chair and observed. The transformation in Clara was incredible. The cautious, somewhat melancholic woman he had met at the hospital became a force of nature, guiding the children with infinite patience and a joy that seemed contagious. "All right, Lucy, remember that ballet tells a story," Clara said, demonstrating a movement despite her pregnancy. "Every movement must have intention. What is your character feeling right now?" "She's happy because she found her prince," Lucy cried, twirling with outstretched arms. "Exactly. And Michael, you're the prince. How do you show you're happy to find her?" Arthur watched fascinated as Clara drew the best out of each child, how she turned technique into emotion and discipline into fun. There was something magical about the way she connected with them, as if she spoke a universal language he had never learned. When the class ended and parents came to pick up the children, Arthur helped Clara clean the studio. They worked in comfortable silence, he collecting the mats while she tidied the mirrors. "They're incredible," Arthur finally said. "The children, I mean. But you, Clara, what you do here is extraordinary." Clara blushed slightly. "It's nothing special. I just teach them to move." "No." Arthur moved closer to her. "You teach them to dream. You give them a place where they can be whatever they want to be. That's something money can't buy." "You talk as if you're very rich," Clara said, with a mischievous smile. Arthur laughed. "Let's just say I don't have to worry about paying rent. But everything I have feels empty compared to this." Clara studied him carefully. "What exactly do you do, Arthur?" "Fintech. I develop platforms that help companies manage investments." He saw the blank expression on her face. "It's as boring as it sounds. It can't be that boring if it made you successful." "Success is relative," Arthur murmured, looking around the studio. I have money, but you have purpose. I think you're the richer of the two. Clara felt something stir in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since before Richard betrayed her. Would you like to stay for dinner? She asked impulsively. I live upstairs, and Evelyn always cooks too much. Arthur nodded without hesitation. Clara's apartment was small but cozy, full of plants, books, and photographs of her students. Evelyn turned out to be a robust 65-year-old woman with intelligent eyes and hands calloused from decades of sewing work. So you're the man who almost killed himself on the bridge, Evelyn said without preamble, as she served a stew that smelled like heaven. Evelyn! Clara protested, mortified. What is the truth? Evelyn sat down and studied Arthur as if he were a specimen in a laboratory. What do you do for a living? I run a tech company. Married? No, ma'am. Children? Arthur felt the familiar pang of pain. No. Evelyn nodded, as if she had confirmed something important. Good. The last idiot who was here thought he was too important to be a father. Her eyes lit up with protective anger. Richard Thorne! That piece of... Well, I'd better not say what I think of him in front of Clara. Evelyn, please, Clara murmured, but Arthur noticed how she tensed at the name. Richard Thorne, Arthur frowned. That name sounded familiar. The choreographer? Clara nodded miserably. I worked with him at the National Ballet. I thought he loved me, but when I told him about the pregnancy, he shrugged. Arthur tried to appear indifferent, but Arthur could see the pain she still carried. He's a man with a reputation, Arthur said carefully. I've read articles about him in financial newspapers. He seems to have a certain tendency towards scandals. Scandals, Evelyn repeated with disdain. That's a fancy way of saying he's a predator who uses young women and discards them when they're no longer useful. Arthur felt something cold settle in his stomach. A man like Richard didn't just disappear from a pregnant woman's life. Men like him always came back when least expected. And as he looked at Clara, beautiful and vulnerable in the golden light of the kitchen, Arthur promised himself that he would be there when that moment came. 2 weeks later, Arthur had become a regular visitor to the dance school. He arrived every afternoon after work, took off his tie, and helped with the younger children's classes. His presence had caused an initial stir, a man in a 3,000-pound suit helping children from Brixton tie their ballet slippers. But soon, he became part of the landscape. Mr. Arthur, can you help me with the jump? Asked Sophie, a 6-year-old girl with mismatched pigtails and a smile missing 2 front teeth. Of course, Princess, Arthur said, kneeling to her height. But remember what Miss Clara says. First you think, then you jump. Clara watched from across the studio, feeling her heart expand dangerously. Arthur had turned out to be a completely different man than she had imagined. Away from business and responsibilities, he was gentle, patient, and had a natural way of connecting with children that constantly surprised her. She's in love with him, Evelyn observed from the doorway with a knowing smile. Don't be ridiculous, Clara murmured, though her cheeks flushed. And he's madly in love with you too. Just look at them. 2 fools pretending this is just friendship. Clara was about to protest when she felt a gentle contraction in her belly. It wasn't unusual at 6 months, but it made her stop and breathe deeply. Arthur noticed her immediately. Are you okay? He asked, leaving Sophie with her practice and approaching quickly. Just Braxton Hicks contractions, Clara said, though her voice held a note of concern. The doctor says it's normal. When was your last checkup? Arthur asked, and Clara was surprised by how naturally he had assumed some responsibility for her well-being. Last week. Everything's fine, Arthur. The babies are healthy. Babies? Arthur stopped abruptly. Did you say babies, plural? Clara bit her lip. She hadn't wanted to reveal it that way. Twins, she confessed. Surprise? Arthur stared at her. and for a moment Clara feared this was too much for him. One baby was one thing, but two. Twins, Arthur repeated slowly. Then, to Clara's surprise, an immense smile spread across his face. Clara, that's incredible. Aren't you scared? She asked. Terrified, Arthur admitted honestly, but also excited. Two little miracles. Clara felt tears threaten to spill. After months of feeling like a burden, as if her pregnancy was something shameful to hide, Arthur's genuine joy completely disarmed her. Arthur, she whispered, I have to tell you something. About Richard, about why things ended, the way they ended. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, Arthur said softly. But I want to. I need you to understand. Clara sat on one of the folding chairs, and Arthur sat opposite her. Richard and I had a relationship for 8 months. I was the principal ballerina, and he was brilliant, charismatic. He made me feel special. Arthur noticed the pain in her voice and had to control the urge to take her hand. When I told him about the pregnancy, his first reaction was to ask me how much it would cost to fix it, as if the babies were an accounting problem. Clara took a deep breath. When I told him I wanted to keep them, he told me he would destroy my career if I tried to publicly link him to them. He threatened you? Arthur's voice had become dangerously low. More than that, he made sure I couldn't get work with any major ballet company in England. A word from him was all it took to close doors for me. Arthur felt a cold, controlled anger he had never experienced. This man had not only abandoned Clara, but had systematically destroyed her career for daring to keep her pregnancy. Clara, Arthur said carefully, I don't know much about ballet, but I know a lot about powerful men who abuse their position. Richard has no right to control your life. It doesn't matter anymore, Clara said, though her voice didn't sound convinced. I have the school. I have the children. I have Evelyn. I have a different life now. But is it the life you want? Arthur asked softly. Clara looked at him for a long moment. I'm learning to want it, she finally said. And lately, there have been new things that make it easier to love. Like what? Arthur asked, though his heart already knew the answer. Like having someone who comes every day just to make sure I'm okay. Like having someone who looks at my students as if they're the most important thing in the world. Like having someone who doesn't see my pregnancy as a complication, but as something beautiful. They stared at each other, the air between them charged with everything they hadn't said. Arthur leaned forward slowly, and Clara didn't move. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss, full of question and promise. When they separated, Arthur rested his forehead against hers. Clara, he murmured, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about being a father or about loving someone the way I love you. But I know I want to try. I want to try with you. Clara felt as if the ground had opened beneath her, but instead of falling, she was flying. However, a small voice in her head whispered a warning. Men like Richard never left quietly, and something told her that her story with the biological father of her children was far from over. Arthur's life had taken on a rhythm he had never experienced before. His days began with meetings at his office on Regent Street, but his afternoons ended in the completely different world of Brixton, helping Clara with the children and having dinner with Evelyn, who had unofficially adopted him as the son she never had. He's lost weight, Evelyn observed one night as she served her famous shepherd's pie. All that happiness is consuming him. Evelyn, Clara protested, though she too had noticed how Arthur seemed more relaxed, younger. Somehow. It's true, Arthur admitted, smiling, but it's a weight I needed to lose. I was drowning in my own life. Clara studied him from across the small table. In the past 3 weeks since the kiss that had changed everything between them, Arthur had become a constant comforting presence, but she knew there were things left unsaid, questions that hung in the air like ghosts. "Arthur," Clara said slowly, "have you thought about what this really means? I mean, not just the dinners and dance classes, the babies, the sleepless nights, the dirty diapers, the complete responsibility for two lives that aren't biologically yours." Arthur put down his fork and looked at her directly. "Clara, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone, not even Eleanor." He took a deep breath. "When I was 12, my parents died in a car accident. I was sent to live with my uncle who raised me, but he never truly loved me. I was always an obligation to him." Clara felt her heart clench. "Since then, I've spent my entire life building walls. Money, success, superficial relationships, all so I wouldn't feel that loneliness again. But with you, with the children at the school, with Evelyn..." He stopped, as if surprised by his own words. "With you, the walls crumbled, and for the first time in 30 years, I don't feel alone." Evelyn had stopped eating and was watching Arthur with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. "The babies," Arthur continued, "they don't need to be biologically mine for me to love them. Love doesn't work that way, does it? You know that better than anyone. Evelyn didn't give birth to you, but you're her daughter." Clara felt tears burn her eyes. "But Arthur, Richard, he could come back. Men like him always come back when you least expect them." "Then we'll be ready," Arthur said, with a determination Clara hadn't seen before. "Because by the time that happens, if it happens, these babies will have a father who loves them unconditionally, and you'll have someone who stands by you." Evelyn abruptly got up from the table and went to fetch something from the kitchen drawer. She returned with a small blue velvet case. "It was my grandmother's," Evelyn said, placing the case in front of Arthur. "Clara is my daughter in every way but blood, and if you're going to be part of this family, you have to do it right." Arthur opened the case with trembling hands. Inside was a simple white gold ring with a small but perfectly cut diamond. "Evelyn," Clara whispered, "you can't." "I can, and I do," Evelyn said firmly. "That ring has been waiting 50 years for the right man, and I think he's finally arrived." Arthur took the ring and knelt beside Clara's chair. His heart was pounding so hard, he was sure the whole building could hear it. "Clara Miller," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "I can't promise you a perfect life. I can't promise you I'll always know what to do. But I can promise you that I will love these babies as if they were my own from the moment they are born. I can promise you that I will protect you and them with my life. And I can promise you that every day I will choose to be here with you, no matter what comes." Clara looked at the ring, then at Arthur, then at Evelyn, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. "Will you do me the honor of marrying me?" Arthur asked. Silence stretched for what seemed like hours. Clara could hear her own heart, the ticking of Evelyn's wall clock, the distant traffic from the street. "Yes," she finally whispered. "Yes, Arthur. Yes." Arthur slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. It was perfect, as if it had been waiting specifically for her. Evelyn clapped and wiped her eyes with her apron. "Well," she said, her voice broken with emotion, "I guess we have a wedding to plan, and fast. These babies aren't going to wait for us to do things in traditional order." Clara laughed through tears, looking at the ring on her finger. It was beautiful, but more than that, it felt right, as if she had finally found where she belonged. But as Arthur kissed her and Evelyn made plans for an intimate wedding, neither of them noticed the figure watching them from the street, a dark-haired man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Richard Thorne had returned to London, and it was time to reclaim what he considered his. The morning that would change everything began like any other. Clara was in the dance studio, 7 months pregnant, overseeing her advanced students' morning practice for the end-of-year performance. Arthur had arrived early with decaf coffee for her and croissants for everyone, a routine he had developed in the 3 weeks since their engagement. "Lucy, remember to keep your shoulders relaxed," Clara instructed, demonstrating the position despite her prominent belly. "Ballet should look effortless, even when it requires all your strength." Arthur watched from his usual spot in the corner, marveling at how Clara had adapted her teaching to her pregnancy, without losing an ounce of her grace or authority. The children adored her, and he could see why. There was something in her way of teaching that turned discipline into love, technique into art. The sound of the front door opening interrupted his thoughts. Clara looked up, expecting to see one of the parents arriving early, but she froze. Richard Thorne stood at the studio entrance with a smile Arthur immediately recognized as that of a predator who had just found his prey. He was taller than Arthur had imagined, with the kind of masculine beauty that looked good on theater posters, but there was something in his eyes that immediately put Arthur on guard. "Hello, Clara," Richard said in a soft voice that filled the space like spilled oil. "You look radiant." The children stopped in the middle of their exercises, sensing the immediate tension that filled the air. Clara had turned pale but kept her chin up. "Children," she said in a firm voice, "go to the next studio and practice the sequences we went over yesterday. Lucy, you're in charge." The students obeyed quickly, though Arthur noticed how some of the older ones looked back with concern before leaving. "Richard?" Clara said once they were alone. "What are you doing here?" Richard entered the studio completely, moving with the calculated grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. His eyes slid to Arthur, evaluating him with the gaze of a man accustomed to cataloging the competition. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" Richard asked, loading the last word with an insinuation that made Arthur clench his fists. "Arthur Davies," Arthur said, standing and extending his hand. "Clara's fiancé." Richard took his hand with a smile that widened, but also grew colder. "Richard Thorne, father of the babies Clara is carrying." The air became thick with unexpressed tension. Arthur felt every muscle in his body prepare for a fight that hadn't even begun. "What do you want, Richard?" Clara asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Richard moved towards her with feline movements. "I came to meet my future wife," he said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "Your what?" Clara recoiled involuntarily. "I've been thinking a lot these past few months," Richard continued, ignoring the shock on her face. "About us, about the family we're about to create. I realized I made a terrible mistake by walking away from you." Arthur instinctively moved closer to Clara, placing himself slightly between her and Richard. "Clara is no longer available," Arthur said in a controlled but dangerous voice. Richard laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Legally, Mr. Davies, those babies are mine, and I've decided I want to be part of their lives, a very important part. After abandoning Clara when she needed you most?" Arthur said. "After threatening to destroy her career?" "Rumors," Richard interrupted with a smile. "Clara always had a tendency towards dramatization. Ask anyone at the National Ballet." Clara felt as if she had been slapped. The ease with which Richard rewrote history, the way he made her pain seem like an invention, angered her more than any direct insult. "Get out of my school," Clara said, her voice trembling with rage. "Now." "Clara, darling," Richard said, and Arthur had to use all his self-control not to hit him for the condescending tone. "I know you're confused right now. Pregnancy hormones can make women make irrational decisions. Like deciding to have your children instead of getting rid of them?" Clara said acidly. Richard frowned slightly, as if she had struck a discordant note in a symphony. "That was different. I wasn't prepared then, but now." He shrugged elegantly. "Now I'm ready to be the father these children deserve." "These children already have the father they deserve," Arthur said firmly. Richard looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. You, Mr. Davies, a man who has known Clara for only 2 months, think you can just show up and play house with my family? This isn't your family, Clara said in a firm voice. You lost that right when you offered me money to abort. A poor choice of words in a moment of shock, Richard said softly. But I'm here to make things right, Clara. To make things as they should be. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the ballet bar. My lawyer will be in touch with you soon. I'm filing for joint custody, of course. The children will split their time between London and Paris, where I'm setting up my new production. Clara felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her. You can't! You don't have the right! I have every right in the world, Richard said, his mask of charm finally slipping to reveal something darker beneath. I am their biological father, and unlike Mr. Davies here, I have the ability to give them the kind of life they deserve. Culture, education in the best schools, connections in the art world. Money, Arthur interrupted coldly. You're talking about money. I'm talking about advantages, Richard corrected. Something a man in your position should understand. Arthur smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My position, he repeated slowly. And what do you think my position is, exactly? Richard looked him up and down, noting the expensive but unostentatious clothes, the quiet confidence Arthur exuded. Comfortable middle class, I suppose. Perhaps an accountant, a bank manager, enough to impress a girl from Brixton, but not exactly the kind of man who can compete with what I can offer. Arthur exchanged a look with Clara, who, despite the terrible situation, felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Richard, Clara said slowly, allow me to introduce you to Arthur Davies, CEO and founder of Invest London. His net worth is approximately... She paused, looking at Arthur. What's your company worth currently, darling? The last valuation was £350 million, Arthur said casually, enjoying how Richard's confidence visibly evaporated. Pounds, of course. Richard was silent for the first time since he had entered, but Arthur could see the wheels turning in his head, recalculating, replanning. Men like Richard didn't give up easily when faced with competition. In fact, they often became more dangerous. The next few days passed in a haze of constant tension. Clara barely slept. Arthur had hired one of London's best family lawyers, and Evelyn had begun standing guard at the school, like a general preparing for war. He's a manipulator, Evelyn said for the 5th time that morning, aggressively organizing the school's invoices. I know men like him. My first husband was the same. Charming when he needed something. A devil when he didn't get what he wanted. Clara sat heavily in a chair, her 7.5-month belly making even simple movements exhausting. But he's right about one thing, she murmured. He's the biological father. That has to count for something legally. Biology doesn't make a father, Arthur said firmly, entering the studio with coffee and the morning newspaper. Love makes it. Commitment makes it. Being present when it matters makes it. Clara took her decaf coffee with trembling hands. What did Mr. Davies say? She asked, referring to the lawyer. Arthur sat beside her, and Clara immediately noticed the tension in his shoulders. The news is mixed, he admitted. Richard technically has parental rights, but the fact that he abandoned you during pregnancy and threatened your career works in our favor. But, Clara could feel there was a but. But he's clever. His application isn't just for joint custody. He's alleging that the environment here isn't appropriate for raising children. Clara froze. What does he mean by that? Arthur looked at her carefully. He's alleging that a neighborhood like Brixton, a financially struggling dance school, isn't the appropriate environment for children who could have access to better opportunities. It's unbelievable, Evelyn exploded. This neighborhood has more love and community than all the rich neighborhoods in London combined. We know, Arthur said calmly, but courts, neighborhoods are different. Clara felt nauseous, and it had nothing to do with pregnancy. And what about you? What about our engagement? That's the most complicated part, Arthur admitted. Legally, until we get married, I have no parental rights. And even after marriage, I'd have to formally adopt the children. And Richard can prevent it. He can try. Clara stayed in silence, processing the information. Suddenly, the whole world she had carefully built, the school, her future with Arthur, her family, seemed to be hanging by a thread. There's something else, Arthur said softly. Mr. Davies did some research on Richard. Apparently, this isn't the first time he's done something like this. Clara looked up abruptly. What do you mean? There have been at least 3 similar cases in the last 10 years. Young women in the ballet industry, relationships that ended when they wanted more commitment than he was willing to give. Evelyn looked at him with interest. And what happened to those women? 2 of them moved out of England. The third, Arthur paused. The third married an Italian musician, and apparently Richard didn't interfere. Why did she leave? Clara murmured, understanding immediately. He left his territory. That's what it seems, Arthur confirmed. Mr. Davies believes that Richard isn't really interested in being a father. This is about control, about making sure that you don't have a happy life without him. Clara felt a cold fury settle in her chest. For months, she had questioned if she had been too dramatic, if she had misinterpreted Richard's actions. But this confirmed what she had known in her heart. Richard saw her as a possession, not as a person. What can we do? She asked. Fight, Arthur simply said. But we need more than just legal arguments. We need to show that what we have here, this life, this community, this love, is better for the children than anything Richard can offer. At that moment, the studio door opened, and Lucy ran in, followed by other students. It was Friday, a special class day for the neighborhood children. Miss Clara, Lucy shouted. There's a man outside with a camera. Arthur and Clara exchanged alarmed looks. What kind of man? Clara asked, trying to keep calm. An older man with a large camera. He told my mom he was making a documentary about the neighborhood. Arthur immediately turned to the window and looked down the street. Indeed, there was a professional cameraman filming the school facade, while Richard was talking to what appeared to be a journalist. Damn, Arthur murmured. What is he doing? Clara asked, approaching the window. Building his narrative, Arthur grimly said. He's documenting the conditions of the neighborhood, probably to use in court. Clara watched Richard gesticulate towards the building, speaking cheerfully with the journalist. Even from a distance, she could see his charming smile, the same one that once made her feel like the most special woman in the world. Miss Clara, said Michael, one of the older students. Is that man going to get us out of here? Clara turned to the children, who looked at her with genuine concern. These children had been her salvation when her world had crumbled. They had given her purpose when she felt lost, joy when she was depressed, a family when she felt alone. No, Clara said, with a firmness that even surprised herself. Nobody is going to get you out of here. This is our school, our community, our family, and we are going to fight for it. Arthur looked at her with admiration. This was the Clara who had saved his life that night on the bridge. Brave, determined, willing to fight for what she loved. But while Clara consoled the children and Arthur planned legal strategies, none of them knew that Richard had an ace up his sleeve that would make everything they had faced so far seem like a child's game. Lady Eleanor Beaumont had decided that it was time to recover what she considered hers. Eleanor Beaumont watched the news broadcast from her apartment in the exclusive neighborhood of Kensington, with a glass of red wine in her hand and a satisfied smile on her lips. The report on parental rights in modern England showed Richard eloquently speaking about his desire to be part of his children's lives, while images of the Brixton neighborhood painted a picture of urban poverty and limitations. Perfect, Eleanor murmured, taking a sip of her Rioja Reserva. Her phone rang, and she saw Richard's name on the screen. "Excellent work," Eleanor said, without preamble when she answered. The report was exactly as we discussed. "Thank you," Richard replied, his voice soft but calculated. "But this is just the beginning. We need something more substantial for the court." Eleanor got up and walked towards the window overlooking Hyde Park. "What do you have in mind?" "Clara is pregnant with twins, which means high risk. If we could show that the stress of her current situation is putting the pregnancy in danger." "I understand," Eleanor interrupted. "An emergency hospitalization would be very convenient for your case, especially if it were caused by emotional stress related to inadequate living conditions." "Precisely," Richard added. Eleanor smiled. She had initially underestimated Richard, but he turned out to be smarter than she thought. "And what exactly do you need from me?" "Your influence. Your family has connections in the family courts, in the media, in the medical system. I need those doors to open for me." Eleanor considered its proposal. Her original plan had been simply to wait for Arthur's relationship with Clara to self-destruct under pressure, but this was more efficient. "Fine," she finally said. "But when this is over, when Arthur realizes he's made a terrible mistake, I'll be there to comfort him." "Of course," Richard mused. "Each one recovers what belongs to him." While Eleanor was having dinner, Clara was experiencing exactly the type of stress that Richard expected to exploit. Braxton Hicks contractions had become more frequent and painful, and the doctor had recommended relative rest. "No, not full bed rest," Arthur explained, helping her settle on the sofa in the apartment. "But you can't be teaching 8 hours a day, either." "The kids need me," Clara protested, "and we need the money from the classes." "The kids need you to have a healthy pregnancy," Evelyn said firmly. "And as for the money," she looked at Arthur significantly, "we already talked about this." "Let me help financially, please," Arthur said softly. Clara knew it was a lost battle. Arthur had been incredibly delicate about not making her feel like a burden, but she could see the concern in his eyes every time she had a contraction. "Fine," she finally said, "but only temporarily, until the babies are born." Arthur sat down next to her on the sofa, taking her hand carefully. "Clara, there's something we need to discuss. About the wedding." Clara looked up at him. "What about the wedding?" "Mr. Davies thinks we should get married as soon as possible, before the babies are born. It will give more strength to my adoption request." Clara frowned. "Are you saying we should get married for legal reasons?" "No," Arthur said quickly. "I am marrying you because I love you, and because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. But Mr. Davies is right. From a legal point of view, the sooner we get married, the better position we'll have." Clara sighed slowly. She understood the logic, but part of her had expected to plan a small but beautiful wedding, not a desperate race to court. "We could do it at the registry office now," Arthur suggested, "and have a proper ceremony after the babies are born, and all this madness ends." "A proper ceremony?" Clara smiled for the first time in days. "With a white dress, flowers, the children from school as witnesses, the whole experience." Evelyn, who had been listening from the kitchen, looked up. "That sounds perfect to me, and I have my grandmother's wedding dress saved. It would only need some adjustments." At that moment, Clara's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Clara Miller?" The voice on the other side was cold and professional. "Yes, I'm Ms. Sarah Jenkins from the London Social Services Department. We need to schedule a visit to assess the living conditions for your future children." Clara felt as if she had received a blow to the stomach. "An assessment? Why?" "We've received a child welfare request. It's standard procedure when there are custody disputes involving minors." Clara looked at Arthur, who had listened enough to understand what was happening. "When?" Clara asked, trembling. "Next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Make sure that both you and Mr. Davies are present." After hanging up, Clara stared at the phone. "He's doing it," she murmured. "Richard is building a case that makes it look like we're inadequate parents." Arthur felt a cold and controlled anger. So, we're going to make sure that when the social worker comes here, she sees exactly what we see. We see a loving family, a community that supports you, and a home full of everything these babies will need. And I'm going to call all the mothers in the neighborhood, Evelyn insisted. By Tuesday, this social worker will understand exactly what kind of place Brixton is. But while Clara, Arthur, and Evelyn planned their defense, Eleanor was making her own phone calls. And by Tuesday, the social worker was going to arrive with a very specific perspective on what constitutes an appropriate home for Richard Thorne's children. The contraction hit Clara like a strong and unexpected wave during the social services evaluation. Sarah Jenkins had been asking about the security measures in the apartment when Clara bent over, grabbing her belly. "Clara?" Arthur immediately got up from his chair. "Are you okay?" "No," Clara moaned. "Something's not right. It's too soon." Evelyn appeared from the kitchen as if she had sensed the problem. "How long between contractions?" she asked, her experience as a foster mother to half a dozen children in the neighborhood kicking in. "This is the second in 10 minutes, Clara murmured, trying to breathe through the pain. Sarah Jenkins watched the scene with an indescribable expression, taking notes on her tablet. "Ms. Miller," she said firmly, "you need to go to the hospital immediately." "I'm on my way with the car," Arthur said, but Clara grabbed him by the arm. "Don't call an ambulance. I don't want to risk it." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Paramedics arrived quickly, evaluated Clara, and confirmed that she was in active premature labor. 7.5 months, said one of the paramedics to his partner. "We need to get to the hospital now." While they were carrying Clara on the stretcher, Arthur took her hand. "You're coming with me?" Clara asked, her eyes full of fear. "They wouldn't separate me from you with dynamite," Arthur said firmly. Evelyn followed him by taxi, and surprisingly, Sarah Jenkins also went to the hospital. "It's part of my evaluation," she explained when Arthur asked her. "I need to see how they handle a family crisis." At St. Thomas's Hospital, Clara was immediately taken to the high-risk maternity unit. Dr. Peterson, her obstetrician, examined Clara with a serious expression. "The babies are in position, but they're premature," he explained. "We're going to do everything we can to stop the labor, but if we can't..." "Will they be okay?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. 32-week-old babies have excellent chances, the doctor assured, but we would prefer to keep them in for a few more weeks. For the next 6 hours, Arthur did not move from Clara's side. He held her hand through the contractions, spoke to her during moments of panic, and when the doctors finally said they couldn't stop the labor, he promised her that everything would be okay. "I'm scared," Clara whispered during a particularly intense contraction. "Me too," Arthur admitted. "But we're going to face all the fears that come, together." Sarah Jenkins observed from a corner of the room, still taking notes. Arthur had tried to ask her to leave, but she had insisted that it was important to document the handling of the emergency. At 11:47 p.m., Master Leo Davies was born, weighing 2.1 kilos. 3 minutes later, Master Noah Davies arrived, weighing 2.3 kilos. Both babies immediately cried, a sound that made Clara and Arthur cry too. "They're perfect," Clara murmured, while the nurses quickly cleaned them before taking them to the neonatal intensive care unit. Arthur looked at these two little beings who had changed their lives before they were even born. They were not his biologically, but at that moment he felt such fierce and immediate love that he was surprised. "Hello, Leo," he murmured when they allowed him to briefly touch the baby's little hand. "Hello, Noah. I'm Dad." Clara watched him interact with the babies, and for the first time in weeks, she felt completely at peace. This man who had appeared in his life as a miracle was exactly the father these children needed. Evelyn arrived at the hospital at midnight with a bag full of clothes for Clara and energy drinks for Arthur. "How are they?" she immediately asked. Small but strong, Arthur said. The doctors say they'll probably be in intensive care for 2 or 3 weeks, but the prospects are excellent. Evelyn hugged Clara carefully. And you, how are you, my daughter? Exhausted, sore, worried, and completely in love, Clara said honestly. Sarah Jenkins approached the group. Ms. Miller, Mr. Davies, I need to talk to you about my assessment. Arthur tensed immediately, but Sarah raised a hand. During the emergency tonight, I observed how you handled a serious medical crisis. I saw Mr. Davies remain calm under pressure, make rational decisions, and consistently prioritize the well-being of Ms. Miller and the babies. I saw Ms. Miller maintain her composure despite the pain and fear, communicate clearly with the medical staff, and show genuine concern for the health of her children. Clara and Arthur exchanged glances, not knowing if this was good or bad. I also observed, Sarah continued, a solid support network in Mrs. Evelyn, who clearly functions as a de facto grandmother for this family. Sarah closed her tablet. My recommendation for the court will be that these children are in a stable, loving, and appropriate environment. Mr. Davies demonstrated tonight that he is completely committed to the well-being of these babies, and Ms. Miller demonstrated that she is a capable and responsible mother. Clara felt as if she could breathe for the first time in weeks. It means that from my professional perspective, these babies do not need to be removed from their current home, Sarah said firmly. But while Arthur and Clara hugged each other in relief, none of them knew that Richard had been watching from the hospital corridor. And what he had seen, Arthur being the first to care for the babies, the way the children immediately calmed down in his arms, the natural way in which he had assumed the role of father, had filled him with a fury that would make everything they had faced so far seem like just a warm-up. 2 weeks later, while Leo and Noah were growing strong in the neonatal intensive care unit, Clara was at home recovering when she received an unexpected call. The name on the screen made her hesitate before answering. Ms. Scarlett Hayes. Scarlett had been one of her best friends at the National Ballet until the situation with Richard had created uncomfortable divisions throughout the company. Wow. Scarlett, Clara said carefully. What a surprise. Clara, I need to see you, Scarlett said without preamble. It's about Richard. There are things you need to know. An hour later, Scarlett was sitting in Evelyn's kitchen, her trembling hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Arthur had come directly from the hospital, where he had been taking the afternoon shift with the babies. First, Scarlett said, I need to apologize. When everything happened to you and Richard, I didn't say anything, and I should have. Clara frowned. What do you mean? Scarlett took a deep breath. You weren't the first, Clara. Richard has done this before. Many times. Arthur leaned forward. What exactly has he done before? Seduce young dancers. Promise them the world. Use his position to control their careers. And then destroy them when they want more than he's willing to give. Clara felt as if she had been hit in the stomach. How many? That I know personally, 5, including you. But I've heard rumors of more. Scarlett took a phone out of her pocket. Clara, I have recordings. Recordings of what? She asked. Richard joking about his conquests. He described in detail how he manipulated women, how he used their vulnerabilities against them. I recorded some of those conversations. Scarlett pressed play on an audio recording. Richard's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakable. Dancers are perfect because they're already used to being told they're not good enough. Clara was especially easy, an orphan with self-esteem issues. I made her believe she was special, unique. When she told me about the pregnancy, it was almost fun to see her crumble when I offered her money to get rid of the problem. Clara turned pale. And if she doesn't accept? Scarlett's voice was heard in the recording. Then I made sure she would never work in ballet in England again. I've already spoken with the directors of all the important companies. A word from me is all it takes. Scarlett stopped the recording. "There's more," she said softly. "Much more. Details on how he destroyed the careers of other women, how he used his influence to make sure they couldn't find work." Arthur was furious, but controlling his anger carefully. "Why are you coming with this now, Scarlett?" Scarlett looked at Clara directly. "Because I found out you're trying to get custody of your babies, and I can't live with myself knowing what I know and doing nothing to stop it," Clara cried, years of doubt and self-blame finally finding relief. "I thought it was my fault," she murmured. "I thought I had misinterpreted everything." "It wasn't you," Scarlett said firmly. "It was never you. Richard is a predator, and he's very good at what he does." Evelyn, who had been listening in silence, spoke for the first time. "Is there more evidence? Other women who would be willing to speak?" Scarlett nodded. "2 of them now live abroad from England, but they're willing to testify by video conference. And there are emails, text messages, documents that show how Richard used his influence to destroy careers." Arthur got up and started walking through the kitchen, his legal mind working quickly. "Scarlett, this could change everything. The case. But it also means you're going to make an enemy of Richard. Are you ready for that?" Scarlett straightened up. "Clara risked her life to save a stranger on a bridge. The least I can do is risk my career to protect her children from a monster." Clara dried her eyes. "Why now, Scarlett? What made you finally decide to speak?" Scarlett hesitated. Then she took out her phone again. "Richard contacted me last week. He wanted me to testify in his favor, to say that you had emotional problems, that you were unstable." She played another recording. "Scarlett, I need your help with Clara. You know her. She was always dramatic, depressive. If you could testify about her mental state, about how the pregnancy affected her negatively." "Richard, I can't do that." "Of course you can. And it would be very beneficial for your career if you did. I'm setting up a new production next year." Clara felt nauseous. "He's trying to make it look like I'm mentally unstable. But now we have evidence that he's the one who has a predatory behavior pattern," Arthur said grimly. "Scarlett, would you be willing to give all this evidence to our lawyer?" "I already did," Scarlett said. "I sent Mr. Davies copies this morning." Clara looked at this woman who had been her friend, then her stranger, and now her savior. "Scarlett, how can I thank you?" "Name one of your children after me," Scarlett said with a smile, "and make sure Richard never gets close to them." But while Scarlett was delivering the evidence that could destroy Richard's case, Eleanor was in her apartment executing the final phase of her plan. It was time to remind Arthur exactly what he had lost when he chose a pregnant dancer over an aristocratic heiress. Eleanor Beaumont was walking through her private office in the penthouse of the Shard, with a glass of champagne in one hand and a phone in the other. The panoramic view of London stretched before her, but her attention was completely focused on the conversation she was having. "Do you have everything ready?" she asked into the phone. "Yes, Lady Beaumont," replied the professional voice on the other end. "The documents are prepared, the photographs are selected, and the timing is calculated for maximum impact." Eleanor smiled with satisfaction. For weeks she had watched Arthur play happy family with Clara and her premature babies. It was time to remind him what really mattered in life: status, wealth, power. The things she could give him, and that a dancer from Brixton never could. "Make sure it arrives just when he's most vulnerable," Eleanor instructed. Arthur was always sentimental under pressure. After hanging up, Eleanor went to her closet and carefully selected her outfit for tomorrow. A Valentino dress in navy blue. It had always been Arthur's favorite color. Louboutin heels, and the pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. The perfect image of aristocratic elegance. The next day, Arthur was in the neonatal intensive care unit, holding Leo against his chest during kangaroo care hour. It was incredible how these tiny beings had completely transformed his perspective on what unconditional love meant. "He's growing," observed Nurse Sarah as she checked Noah's monitors. "Both are gaining weight exactly as we expected. When can they go home? Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. If they continue to progress like this, probably in a week, maybe less. Arthur smiled, imagining taking his children, because that's what they were, regardless of biology, home for the first time. Clara had been coming every morning and every evening, but Arthur had insisted on taking the night shifts so she could rest. Mr. Davies, Sarah hesitated. There's a woman here who says she needs to speak with you. She says it's urgent. Arthur frowned, but he didn't want to wake Leo. Can you tell her to wait until the kangaroo care session is over? I told her that, but she insisted. She says she's Eleanor Beaumont, and that you'll want to hear what she has to say. Arthur felt his blood run cold. Eleanor, here. Now. When everything was finally starting to stabilize. Tell her I'll be out in 5 minutes, Arthur said, carefully transferring Leo back to his incubator. He found Eleanor in the waiting room, as elegant and beautiful as ever. But there was something in her eyes he didn't remember seeing before. Something cold and calculated. Eleanor, Arthur said carefully. What are you doing here? I came to save you. From yourself, Eleanor said directly, standing to greet him. Arthur, I've been watching this experiment of yours, and I think it's time for you to return to reality. Experiment. Arthur felt a cold anger beginning to form in his chest. Eleanor pulled a tablet from her Hermes bag. I've been doing some research on your new family. Did you know that Clara Miller has been in psychological therapy intermittently for the past 5 years, dealing with depression and anxiety issues? Arthur stood motionless. Clara had mentioned seeing a therapist after Richard left her. But how on earth did you get that information? Family connections are useful, Eleanor said casually. I also have photos of Clara having what appears to be a panic attack outside an audition last year, and medical documentation showing she was briefly hospitalized for exhaustion. Eleanor slid the tablet towards him. Arthur looked at the images and felt sick. They were photos of Clara leaving various medical appointments, clearly taken without her knowledge. You're crazy, Arthur murmured. You've been spying on her. I've been protecting your interests, Eleanor corrected. Arthur, look at the facts objectively. This woman has a history of mental instability. She's raising another man's children, and she's dragging you into a legal battle that's going to ruin your reputation. Arthur shoved the tablet back at her. Eleanor, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over here. Game? Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Arthur, I'm not the one playing. Do you really think it's a coincidence that Richard showed up exactly when your relationship with Clara was getting serious? Arthur froze. What do you mean by that? Eleanor smiled, and Arthur finally saw the true woman behind the aristocratic mask. Richard and I have been in contact, of course. I provided him with some useful information about your financial situation, and he kept me informed about the progress of his custody case. You've been working together. Arthur felt as if he had received a physical blow. Think about it, Arthur. He gets his children back and can keep them away from an unstable influence. You free yourself from a situation that's only going to get more complicated. And Eleanor moved closer to him, placing a hand on his arm. I can offer you the life you truly deserve. No drama, no legal battles, no responsibility for children who aren't yours. Arthur looked at this woman he had once planned to marry and realized he had never truly known her. Eleanor, he said in a dangerously low voice, if you ever come near Clara, the babies, or me again, I'm going to use every resource I have to make sure you regret it. Eleanor recoiled slightly, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Arthur, you're being irrational. No, Arthur said, turning to leave. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely rational. And what I rationally see is that Clara is worth 1,000 of you. As Arthur returned to the neonatal unit, Eleanor pulled out her phone. If Arthur wasn't going to be reasonable, it was time to accelerate the timeline. Richard needed to know they had to act now, before the babies were discharged from the hospital. After that, it would be much harder to separate them from Clara. Clara was feeding Noah when Arthur returned to the neonatal unit. One look at his face told her immediately that something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" Clara asked softly, still focused on Noah, but clearly concerned. Arthur sat heavily in the chair beside her. "Eleanor was here." Clara looked up abruptly. "Your ex-fiancée? What did she want?" Arthur recounted the entire conversation, watching as Clara's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, to a cold fury he had never seen before. "She and Richard have been working together all this time." Clara finished feeding Noah and carefully placed him in his incubator before turning fully towards Arthur. "That's what she says. Arthur, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Clara said firmly. "Arthur, this isn't your fault, but it explains a lot." "Like what?" "Like why Richard waited exactly until we started getting serious to show up. Like why his lawyer seemed to know so much about our financial circumstances. Like why Eleanor never tried to reconcile with you until now." Arthur ran his hands through his hair. "Clara, there's something else. Eleanor has your medical information. Therapy documentation. Photos." Clara stood motionless. "What kind of medical information?" "About your depression after Richard. The hospitalization for exhaustion." Clara closed her eyes for a moment. "Arthur, there are things about my past that I haven't told you because I didn't want you to see me as broken or unstable." "Clara, no, let me finish." Clara opened her eyes and looked at him directly. "After Richard destroyed my career, I had a nervous breakdown, a real one. I ended up in the hospital for 3 days because I hadn't eaten or slept in a week. I was seeing a therapist twice a week for months." Arthur took her hand. "That doesn't make you unstable. That makes you human. But in a courtroom, with the right lawyer..." Clara didn't finish the sentence. "They're not going to use that against you," Arthur said firmly. "I won't allow it." At that moment, Sarah approached them with a worried expression. "Mr. Davies, Ms. Miller, there's someone here who says he needs to see you. A man who claims to be the biological father of the babies." Clara and Arthur exchanged glances. "He's in Dr. Peterson's office," Sarah continued. "He says he has legal documents." Clara immediately stood up. "We're going to face this once and for all." Richard was sitting in Dr. Peterson's office as if he owned the place, dressed in an expensive suit, and with a smile that made Arthur want to hit him. "Clara, my dear," Richard said, standing when they entered. "You look much better than the last time I saw you." "What do you want, Richard?" Clara asked without preamble. Richard placed a folder on the doctor's desk. "I have a temporary court order, granting me immediate visitation rights to my children." Clara felt as if the ground had opened beneath her. "Visitation rights? They're premature. They're in intensive care." "Are they medically stable?" Richard interrupted. "And as their biological father, I have a right to time with them, 1 hour a day." Supervised by hospital staff, Arthur approached the desk and examined the documents. They were real, official, and terrifyingly specific. "How did you get this so quickly?" Arthur asked. Richard smiled. "I have excellent lawyers and judges who understand the importance of parental rights." Clara felt dizzy. "Richard, the babies barely weigh 2 kilos each. They need stability, routine." "They need to know their real father," Richard said. And Arthur had to physically restrain himself from hitting him. Dr. Peterson, who had been reviewing the legal documents, looked up. "Mr. Thorne, although these documents appear to be in order, I must insist that any visits be made under strict medical supervision. These babies are at a very delicate stage." "Of course," Richard said magnanimously. "I only want the best for my children." Clara looked at this man who had destroyed her life once and now threatened to do it again. But this time, there was something different about her. This time, she was not alone. And this time, she had something more important to protect than just her own heart. "Okay," Clara finally said. "You can have your supervised hour, but Richard—" "Yes?" Clara stepped closer to him, and Arthur could see the strength she had developed during these difficult months. "If you do anything, that puts the health or well-being of my children at risk, I'm going to make sure that you never get near them again. And this time, I have the resources to back it up." Richard looked at Arthur over Clara's shoulder. "Ah, yes, your new sugar daddy. Very convenient." Arthur stepped forward, but Clara put a hand on his chest. "He's not worth it," Clara murmured. "He wants you to react like that." Richard headed towards the door. "I'll start my visits tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. He paused at the door. "Enjoy this time with them, because very soon my children are going to know who their real father is." After Richard left, Clara collapsed into a chair. But instead of the tears Arthur expected, there was determination in her eyes. The war had officially begun. But this time, Clara was not the vulnerable young woman Richard had destroyed before. This time, she was a mother, and that made her something much more dangerous. The family courtroom was filled with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Clara, dressed in a navy blue suit that Evelyn had carefully altered to disguise her postpartum figure, sat next to Arthur and their lawyer, Mr. Davies, at the defendant's table. Across the room, Richard looked impeccable in an Armani suit, flanked by a legal team that clearly cost more than the dance school's annual budget. Judge Thompson, a 60-year-old man with reading glasses and an expression that revealed nothing, reviewed the case documents one last time before beginning. "This is a complex case involving the custody of newborn twins, Leo and Noah Miller," the judge began. "Mr. Richard Thorne is requesting joint custody as the biological father, while Ms. Clara Miller is requesting full custody with subsequent adoption by Mr. Arthur Davies, her fiancé." Clara felt as if her heart was going to burst from her chest. After weeks of preparation, the moment that would decide her children's future had finally arrived. Richard's lawyer, an elegant man named Mr. Harrison, rose for his opening argument. "Your Honor, this case is simple. A biological father who recognizes his responsibility and wishes to be part of his children's lives. Mr. Thorne has been clear in his intention to provide financial stability, superior educational opportunities, and cultural exposure that will greatly benefit these children." Mr. Harrison paused dramatically. "Ms. Miller, while undoubtedly well-intentioned, lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that, frankly, does not offer the advantages these children deserve. Furthermore, there are documented concerns about her emotional stability, including hospitalizations for depression and anxiety." Clara clenched her fists, but Mr. Davies had warned her this would come. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrison continued, "we are not here to completely remove these children from their mother. We simply ask that they have access to the father who can give them opportunities she cannot." When Mr. Harrison sat down, Mr. Davies slowly rose. He was an older man, less elegant than his counterpart, but there was something in his presence that immediately changed the energy of the room. "Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate that this case is not about money, status, or even biology. It is about what constitutes a true family and what is best for these specific children." Mr. Davies approached the jury. "Mr. Thorne speaks of responsibility. But where was that responsibility when he abandoned Ms. Miller at the most vulnerable moment of her life? He speaks of stability, but we will demonstrate a pattern of behavior that is anything but stable." For the next 2 hours, Richard's case was presented as he had planned. Testimonies about his professional success, photographs of Clara's apartment in contrast to his London home, medical documents that painted a picture of mental instability. But then it was Mr. Davies' turn. "I call Scarlett Hayes to the stand." Scarlett entered the room with dignity, dressed professionally, but without ostentation. When she raised her right hand to swear to tell the truth, Clara could see her hand trembling slightly. "Ms. Hayes," Mr. Davies began, "what is your relationship with Mr. Thorne? I worked with him at the National Ballet for 3 years. I also had a personal relationship with him. Can you describe the nature of that relationship?" Scarlett took a deep breath. "At first, Richard was charming, attentive. He made me feel special, as if I were the only woman in his world. But gradually, he began to control aspects of my professional and personal life. Can you be more specific? He decided what roles I could audition for, who I could talk to in the company, even what I should eat to maintain my figure. When I finally tried to end the relationship, he threatened to ruin my career." Richard's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay testimony about a personal relationship that has no direct relevance to this case." "Your Honor," Mr. Davies responded, "the relevance will become clear immediately." The judge nodded. "Proceed, but get to the point." Mr. Davies approached Scarlett. "Ms. Hayes, do you have physical evidence of Mr. Thorne's threats?" Scarlett nodded and took out her phone. "I have recordings of conversations where Mr. Thorne describes his methods for controlling and manipulating young women in the ballet company." The silence in the room was absolute. Richard had visibly turned pale. "Your Honor, I would like to play one of these recordings," Mr. Davies said. After a brief consultation, the judge allowed the audio to be played. Richard's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Clara was especially easy, an orphan with self-esteem issues. I made her believe she was special, unique. When she told me about the pregnancy, it was almost fun to see her crumble when I offered her money to get rid of the problem. Clara felt tears burn her eyes, but not from sadness, from relief. Finally, the world could hear the truth about Richard Thorne. The recording continued. "If she doesn't accept, I'll make sure she never works in ballet in England again. I've already spoken with the directors of all the important companies. A word from me is all it takes to ruin these girls." Judge Thompson frowned deeply. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "is that your voice on the recording?" Richard slowly stood up, his confidence completely evaporated. "Your Honor, that conversation was taken out of context." "It's a simple question, Mr. Thorne. Is that your voice?" "Yes, but—" "There's no but, Mr. Thorne. Sit down." Mr. Davies continued his interrogation. "Ms. Hayes, do you know of other women who have experienced similar behavior from Mr. Thorne?" "Yes, at least 4 that I know personally. And would any of them be willing to testify?" At that moment, the courtroom door opened. 2 women entered, clearly nervous but determined. Mr. Davies smiled. "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to call Ms. Emily White and Ms. Olivia Green to the stand." Over the next hour, the 2 women told devastatingly similar stories. Richard seducing young dancers, promising them brilliant careers, controlling their lives, and then professionally destroying them when they tried to become independent. When the testimonies ended, Richard looked like a completely different man from the one who had confidently entered that morning. But Mr. Davies wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I call Mr. Arthur Davies to the stand." Arthur stood up and walked to the stand with the quiet confidence Clara had come to love. When he swore to tell the truth, his eyes met hers for a moment, and Clara saw all the promise and determination she had seen that first night at the hospital. "Mr. Davies," Mr. Davies began, "how long have you known Ms. Miller?" 4 months. "And in that time, have you observed any behavior that concerns you regarding her ability to be a mother?" Arthur straightened up. "Quite the opposite. I've seen Clara transform the lives of dozens of children at her dance school. I've seen how she handles crises with calmness and rationality, and I've seen how she has put the needs of her babies before everything else, even when it meant sacrificing her personal comfort." Arthur paused, and Clara could see the emotion in his eyes. "Your Honor, I have met many successful people in my professional life, but I have never met anyone with the strength, dedication, and capacity for unconditional love that Clara demonstrates every day. Richard's lawyer rose for cross-examination. Mr. Davies, you have been trying to have biological children for years, correct? That's correct. And isn't it true that your relationship with Ms. Miller is motivated by your desperation to be a father, regardless of the circumstances? Arthur looked at the lawyer directly. If I had been desperate to be a father, I would have chosen an easier situation. A woman without the complication of an existing pregnancy, without the financial struggles, without the legal battle I knew would come. Then why Ms. Miller? Arthur smiled for the first time during the entire process. Because I love her, because she saved my life, literally and figuratively, and because when I see her with those babies, I see the kind of mother every child deserves to have. Richard's lawyer looked frustrated. Mr. Davies, isn't it true that you can provide these children with financial advantages that compensate for other deficiencies? What deficiencies? Arthur asked, and Clara noticed the dangerous tone in his voice. Well, the mother's lack of emotional stability, the socio-economic environment. Arthur leaned forward in his chair. Sir, Clara's apartment in Brixton has more true love than all the mansions in Kensington combined. The children at her school love her because she sees their potential when others only see their limitations. And if you believe that stability is measured by money in the bank instead of by the ability to love unconditionally, then you clearly don't understand what makes a family. When Arthur stepped down from the stand, Clara felt as if she could fly. This man not only loved her, he defended her, he valued her. He saw in her everything Richard had never been able to see. Mr. Davies rose for his final argument. Your Honor, we have heard abundant evidence that Mr. Thorne has an established pattern of predatory behavior towards young women. We have heard recordings where he himself admits to manipulating and destroying lives for personal pleasure. Mr. Davies approached the judge. More importantly, we have seen clear evidence that these babies already have a family, a mother who loves them unconditionally, a man who has shown that love is stronger than biology, and a community that will support them throughout their lives. Mr. Thorne talks about opportunities, but what opportunity for healthy emotional development is there with a father who sees women as objects of manipulation? What opportunity is there to learn about true love from a man who abandons women when they need him most? Mr. Davies paused. Finally, Your Honor, I ask you to look beyond bank accounts and mansions and see what truly matters. These babies deserve to grow up in a home where they are loved by those who chose them, not by those who accidentally created them. Judge Thompson retired to deliberate. Clara, Arthur, Evelyn, and Scarlett waited in the hallway for what seemed like hours, but in reality was only 40 minutes. When they were called back into the courtroom, Judge Thompson had a serious but not indecipherable expression. I have carefully considered all the evidence presented, he began. This case involves the well-being of two innocent children, and that consideration must be paramount in any decision. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Thorne has a pattern of behavior that is inconsistent with the best interests of these children. His own words, recorded without his knowledge, reveal a mentality that views women, and by extension children, as objects for his personal manipulation. Richard had turned completely pale. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence shows that these children are already in a stable and loving environment. Ms. Miller has proven to be a dedicated and capable mother, and Mr. Davies has demonstrated a genuine commitment to the well-being of these children. The judge looked directly at Richard. Therefore, I completely deny Mr. Thorne's request for custody. Furthermore, I grant full custody to Ms. Miller, with approval for subsequent adoption by Mr. Davies. Clara collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed with relief. Finally, Judge Thompson said, given the demonstrated pattern of behavior and the manipulative nature of Mr. Thorne's actions, I impose a restraining order of 500 meters from the minors and their caregivers, valid for 5 years. Richard abruptly stood up and left the courtroom without saying a word, followed by his legal team. But as Clara cried with relief in Arthur's arms, neither of them could imagine how this victory would change them forever, and how the family they had fought so hard to protect would become something even more beautiful than they had dreamed. 2 years later, Saturday morning began like every morning in Clara and Arthur's new home in Notting Hill, with the sound of small feet running down the wooden hallway and laughter filling every corner of the house. "Daddy, Daddy!" shouted Leo, bursting into the master bedroom with Noah running behind him. "The kittens are awake!" Arthur sat up in bed, smiling at the sight of his children, because that's what they were in every way that mattered. In their dinosaur pajamas that Evelyn had made them, and their hair disheveled from sleep. "Good morning, little monsters," Arthur said, reaching for them and tickling them until they squirmed with laughter. Clara watched from her side of the bed, still marveling at how this life that had seemed impossible had become her daily reality. The twins had grown strong and healthy, with Leo's mischievous personality and Noah's more contemplative nature, creating a family dynamic that filled their days with adventure and joy. "Clara," Arthur said softly, "the kittens are awake." Clara laughed. The kittens were actually Sophie and Michael, the two children Clara and Arthur had officially adopted 6 months ago. Siblings aged 8 and 6, who had been in the foster care system after their parents died in a car accident. When Clara met them at a dance school event, she knew immediately that they belonged in her family. "Let's see what those kittens are doing," Clara said, getting up and following the parade of children to the kitchen. The new Dreams in Motion dance school now occupied an entire 4-story building in Notting Hill, serving over 300 children from all over London. What had started as a small school in Brixton had become a community center that offered not only dance classes, but also academic tutoring, arts programs, and support for families in difficult situations. In the kitchen, Sophie was helping Evelyn prepare breakfast, while Michael built an elaborate cereal tower on his plate. "Good morning, family," Clara said, kissing the crown of each little head before pouring herself coffee. "Mommy," Sophie said, using the word she had started to use naturally after a few months at home. "Can we go to the park after breakfast? I want to teach Leo how to do pirouettes on the grass." "Only if you promise you won't come back covered in mud like last time," Arthur said, entering the kitchen fully dressed for his morning run. "We promise nothing," Michael shouted, and everyone laughed. As they prepared to go to the park, Clara reflected on how her definition of family had evolved. It wasn't the traditional nuclear family she had imagined when she was young, but it was perfect for them. Arthur had officially adopted all 4 children after they got married, and although they didn't share blood, they shared something stronger: daily choice, unconditional love, and the commitment to be there for each other no matter what came. "Clara," Arthur said softly, approaching her as the children gently squabbled over shoes at the entrance. "There's something I want to show you." He pulled a letter from his pocket with the official seal of the family courts. "What is it?" Clara asked, though her tone was curious rather than worried. They no longer lived with the constant fear that had dominated the first few years. "It's from Richard," Arthur said carefully. Clara felt a pang of the old anxiety, but realized it was more an echo of the past than real fear. "What does he say?" Arthur opened the letter and read, "Clara and Arthur, I am writing this letter to formally apologize for the pain I caused during one of the most vulnerable periods of your lives. The last 2 years have given me time to reflect on my actions and seek professional help to understand the destructive patterns that dominated my behavior for so many years. I have seen photos of your beautiful family in articles about the dance school, and it is clear that Leo and Noah are exactly where they should be. They are fortunate to have parents who consciously chose them and who give them the kind of love I would never have been able to provide. I married Eleanor last year, and we are expecting our first child. It's strange, but until I experienced what it truly means to want to be a father, not just to possess a child, but to truly want to be responsible for shaping a life, I didn't understand how selfish and destructive my previous actions had been. Please know that I have no intention of interfering in your lives again. You have earned the right to peace, and I have earned the responsibility to be a better person than I was. I wish you all the happiness in the world. Your children are fortunate. Sincerely, Richard. Thorne. Clara was silent for a moment, processing the words. How do you feel about this? Arthur asked softly. Relieved, Clara said honestly. Not for the apology. That's for him, not for me. But relieved to know that he's truly gone from our lives. Arthur nodded. Do you want to keep the letter? Clara looked towards the living room, where her 4 children were laughing as they tried to put on their coats. No, she finally said. That story ended a long time ago. This is our story now. Arthur smiled and kissed her forehead. I like our story better. Mommy, Daddy! Leo shouted from the door. Let's go to the park! The swings are waiting for us! Clara took Arthur's hand, and they headed towards the door, where Evelyn already had the children organized in a more or less orderly line. Ready for adventure? Arthur asked. Always, shouted the 4 children in unison. As they walked through the streets of Notting Hill towards the park, Clara reflected on the path that had led them here. It had begun with a terrible night on a bridge with 2 broken lives that met at the exact moment they needed each other most. It had continued with legal battles, sleepless nights, fears about whether they were strong enough for this life they had chosen. But every challenge had made them stronger, more certain that they had made the right decisions. Now, watching Arthur teach Noah how to kick a ball, while Sophie taught Leo ballet steps on the grass, Clara realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A family that she had chosen to build step by step, day by day, conscious decision after conscious decision. Clara, Evelyn said, sitting next to her on the park bench, do you regret anything? Clara watched her children play. Her husband who had chosen to be a father to children who didn't share his blood, but did share his heart. The woman who had raised her, and who now helped raise another generation. I only regret one thing, Clara said slowly. What? Evelyn asked, concerned. Clara smiled. I regret taking so long to understand that the best families are not those that are born, but those that are built with unconditional love, infinite patience, and the daily decision to be there for each other, no matter what happens. Arthur came running, chased by 4 children screaming with laughter. What are the most beautiful women in the park thinking about? He asked, dropping onto the grass next to the bench. How lucky we are, Clara said, dimply. Arthur looked at his family, imperfect, chaotic, full of noise and laughter and unconditional love, and felt his heart could explode with happiness. Yes, he said, reaching out to take Clara's hand, while Leo climbed on his back, and Noah decided that Arthur's legs made excellent gymnastics bars. We are very lucky. As the sun set over London, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, the Davies-Miller family walked back home. The children ran ahead, chasing pigeons and telling elaborate stories about imaginary adventures. Evelyn and Clara walked arm in arm, talking about plans for the dance school's new expansion. And Arthur walked behind, watching this family that had appeared in his life when he least expected it, and that had turned out to be exactly what his heart had been searching for, his entire life. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, and Evelyn had retired to her room, Clara and Arthur sat on their balcony, looking at the city lights that had witnessed their love story. Do you know what's the strangest thing? Clara said, snuggling against Arthur's shoulder. What? That night on the bridge, when your car crashed, I thought I was saving a stranger's life. But it turns out I was saving my own life too. Arthur hugged her tighter. No, he said softly. We were saving each other. Clara looked up at the stars that shone faintly over London. Do you think we were always destined to meet? Arthur considered the question seriously. I think, he finally said, that fate put us in the same place at the right time. But everything that came after, the love, the family, this life, we built that ourselves, decision by decision, day by day. Clara smiled. Then I guess fate wrote the first chapter, but we wrote the rest of the story, and what a beautiful story it turned out to be, Arthur murmured, kissing the crown of her head as the lights of London sparkled before them like promises of all the tomorrows that awaited them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. Like this video if you were moved by Arthur and Clara's journey, and comment your thoughts below. What was your favorite part of their story?